Before we begin, just a quick note. This video doesn't use horror footage or jump scares. Instead, I've kept it simple. Just real chilling stories and soft rain sounds in the background. Because sometimes, all it takes is a voice and your own imagination to feel fear. So if you're lying in bed, trying to sleep, just close your eyes, listen, and let the stories unfold. This story takes place in 2006, in a small, quiet town tucked away in the Appalachian Hills. Ethan, the youngest sibling of his family, had been living a stressful life in the city, weighed down by the pressures of work, endless deadlines, and the constant feeling that he was failing everyone around him. He longed for a break, a place to breathe and escape the chaos, and so he returned to the family's old, abandoned estate, a house he had barely visited as a child, a place filled with memories he had long tried to forget. The estate itself was imposing, its weathered wooden walls and overgrown gardens giving it a sense of isolation that was almost suffocating. As Ethan stepped inside, the air felt thick, almost heavy, carrying the scent of old wood, dust, and something indefinably wrong. The house seemed to watch him, its silent halls and shadowed corners hinting at secrets buried long ago. A chill ran down his spine, and for a fleeting moment, he wondered if he had made a mistake coming here alone. But he shook it off, attributing the unease to the fatigue from his journey. The family's history with the estate was far from ordinary. Years ago, a bitter property dispute had erupted between Ethan's father and his unmarried uncle, Victor. The tension escalated, resentment festered, and tragically, Victor's life ended under circumstances that left lingering anger in the family, and as it would soon become painfully clear, beyond it. Though Victor had passed away decades earlier, the estate seemed to carry the weight of his unrelenting anger, waiting for the moment it could reach out to those who disturbed it. Ethan tried to immerse himself in normalcy, unpacking his bags, organizing the rooms, and convincing himself that the estate was simply old and neglected, nothing more. Yet subtle signs began to unsettle him almost immediately. Doors creaked open on their own. Objects shifted slightly when he wasn't looking, and faint whispers seemed to float through the hallways, calling his name just at the edge of perception. Shadows stretched and retreated in ways that defied reason, and more than once, Ethan felt as though invisible eyes were following his every move. By the end of his first week, the subtle disturbances had escalated into something impossible to ignore. The estate was no longer just a quiet house. It was alive with a presence that was intelligent, patient, and unmistakably angry. Ethan began to realize that the warnings from the locals and the hushed family stories were not exaggerations. They were signs of a vengeful spirit, Uncle Victor himself, awakened by long-held grievances and, unknowingly, by Ethan's own arrival. A cold dread settled in his chest, tightening with each creak and whisper, and for the first time, he understood that the family curse had not only survived generations, it had been waiting for him. By the second week, the presence in the estate had grown impossible to ignore. Ethan could feel it pressing against him constantly, like a cold hand squeezing his chest. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant whisper, sent a jolt of panic through his body. Shadows seemed to move with a mind of their own, stretching across walls and vanishing when he tried to look directly at them. He often paused mid-step, heart racing, listening to the faint sounds that didn't belong to the house, or any living creature. The sense of being watched was relentless, gnawing at his nerves until even the smallest sound made him flinch. Lily, the eldest sibling, had begun to notice similar signs. She would wake in the middle of the night, shivering and trembling, convinced that someone or something was standing just beyond her bed. She felt eyes on her even in empty rooms, a heavy weight pressing down on her chest as if invisible fingers held her there. The fear was so consuming that she would sometimes retreat to corners, hugging herself, silently praying for a moment of peace that never came. Ethan watched her trembling, feeling a helpless knot of guilt tighten in his stomach. He had brought them here, allowed guests into the house, and now he was powerless to shield them from the consequences. Noah, the middle sibling, faced the most physical disturbances. Objects would move or fall without explanation. Chairs toppled, doors slammed, and on more than one occasion, he felt icy hands grip his shoulders or chest, leaving him gasping and shaking. One night, while checking the old attic, a stack of boxes toppled over as if shoved by an invisible force. The cold brush across his arms left him frozen, fear coiling tightly in his gut. He screamed for Ethan and Lily, but his voice barely carried before it was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the house. Ethan, who had tried so hard to stay rational, began to feel the weight of guilt crushing him. Every creak, every shadow, every unexplained whisper reminded him that he had unknowingly reawakened the spirit. He could feel Uncle Victor's presence growing stronger, angrier, feeding off their fear and mistakes. Sleep became impossible. Even in daylight, the oppressive energy lingered, making each step feel heavier than the last. He realized with sinking dread that ignoring the warnings or blaming the disturbances on imagination would no longer suffice. Despite the terror, there were fleeting moments when Ethan tried to keep them together, offering quiet words of reassurance. "We're going to get through this," he would whisper, his voice trembling, but carrying the fragile hope that unity might shield them. He could feel the fear in Lily's grip on his arm and in Noah's tense shoulders, and it fueled his determination even as his heart pounded with anxiety. Yet deep down, he knew the spirit was testing them, learning their weaknesses and preparing for the moment it would strike with full force. The estate was no longer just haunted, it had become a trap, and the family was caught in the middle of a vengeance centuries in the making. By the third week, Uncle Victor's presence became impossible to ignore. The disturbances were no longer subtle. They were deliberate, targeted, and terrifying. One night, Ethan woke to the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway outside his room. His heart thudded violently, and sweat slicked his palms as he clutched the blanket, frozen in fear. The footsteps grew louder, approaching his door, and then stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence that pressed against his eardrums. When he finally summoned the courage to move, the room felt impossibly cold, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist around him, as if mocking his hesitation. Lily had her own terrifying encounter that same night. While trying to check on her younger brother, she felt a hand, or something that felt like a hand, brush against her shoulder. She spun around, heart hammering, but there was nothing there. A whisper echoed from the darkness, her name, drawn out with a sinister, almost gleeful tone. She collapsed to her knees, shaking and crying, her voice barely audible as she called for Ethan. When he arrived, the shadows seemed to recede just enough to make him question if it had been real, or if the estate itself was toying with them. Noah's encounters were even more physical. One evening, while trying to close a window in the dining room, he felt a violent push against his back, sending him sprawling across the floor. The room spun around him, and he struggled to catch his breath as unseen hands seemed to grip his limbs, pinning him in place. Objects around him rattled and fell, as if the very air had become alive with Victor's wrath. Ethan rushed to help, but he, too, felt the oppressive energy of the house pressing down, a weight that made even movement a struggle. As the nights progressed, Ethan could feel the spirit focusing on him, as if punishing him for his mistakes. The guilt of having allowed guests into the estate gnawed at him constantly. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow seemed to carry judgment. He started to notice a pattern. The spirit was targeting their fears, feeding on their insecurities, and testing their bond. The siblings could no longer deny that they were being tormented, and the terror was intensifying with every passing night. Despite the overwhelming fear, Ethan knew they had to stay together. He would take Lily and Noah into his arms, whispering reassurances he barely believed himself, promising they would survive this nightmare. Yet each moment of comfort was fleeting. The estate was alive with a malice that would not rest. The vengeful spirit of Uncle Victor was no longer a legend or a ghost story. It was real, intelligent, and intent on making the family pay for the past. By the fourth week, the relentless terror had taken a toll on Ethan and his siblings. Exhaustion hung over them like a dark cloud, and fear had become a constant companion. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of shadow made them flinch. Sleep was a luxury they no longer had. The nights were filled with whispers, footsteps, and the suffocating presence of Uncle Victor. Ethan felt the weight of guilt heavier than ever, knowing that it was his actions, allowing guests into the house, that had reignited the spirit's wrath. Desperate for answers, Ethan turned to the town for help. Locals who had long whispered about the estate gave him wary glances and vague warnings, their eyes reflecting memories of terror that spanned generations. Among them, he found Mr. Callahan, a retired spiritual practitioner known for handling situations far darker than any ordinary haunting. The moment Ethan explained the events, the man's expression hardened. He listened carefully, nodding, and then spoke in a low, measured tone. "You have stirred something that has waited a long time. This is no ordinary ghost. It is bound by anger, vengeance, and mistakes that have been left unresolved. It will not relent until the wrongs of the past are acknowledged." The siblings huddled together as Ethan recounted every incident to Mr. Callahan. Lily trembled, clutching Ethan's arm, tears streaming down her face as she described the shadows that stalked her and the whispers that called her name. Noah's hands shook as he explained the physical assaults, the cold touches that pinned him to walls, the objects that flew across rooms. Ethan's own voice cracked as he admitted his guilt, the crushing knowledge that his carelessness had strengthened Victor's power pressing down on him. Mr. Callahan explained that the spirit's vengeance was deeply tied to the property dispute that had ended in Victor's death. By allowing guests into the estate, Ethan had unknowingly energized the curse, giving the spirit the strength to act more aggressively. The siblings listened in fear as the practitioner described the consequences of ignoring such a presence: escalating torment, potential harm, and a cycle that could extend beyond their lifetimes if left unresolved. For the first time, the family began to grasp the enormity of their situation. The terror they faced was not random. It was calculated, a reflection of unresolved anger and betrayal that had festered for years. Their only hope lay in confronting the spirit directly, acknowledging the past, and performing the necessary rituals to break the curse. Yet even as Mr. Callahan outlined the steps they needed to take, the house seemed to pulse with impatience, as if Victor himself was aware of their plan and determined to make them pay for every misstep. The siblings left Mr. Callahan's presence with a heavy mixture of dread and determination. They knew the nights ahead would test them in ways they had never imagined. The estate was no longer just a house. It was a battleground, and they were caught in the center of a long festering vengeance that demanded courage, unity, and the willingness to face the darkness head on. The nights that followed were the most terrifying yet. Uncle Victor's presence no longer lingered at the edges of perception. He was everywhere, in every shadow, in every creak, every cold gust that swept through the house. Ethan could feel the malicious intent pressing down on him, a suffocating weight that made it hard to breathe. Every step he took seemed watched, judged, and every whisper of the wind sounded like Victor's voice, taunting him, reminding him of his failures. Lily was the first to confront the spirit directly. One evening, she walked through the dim hallway to fetch a candle when she suddenly felt a sharp, icy grip on her wrist. She gasped and stumbled, nearly falling, as a shadow loomed in front of her, tall and oppressive. The air around her grew colder by the second, and the oppressive silence was broken only by a low, menacing whisper of her name. Her pulse raced and tears blurred her vision as she ran to Ethan, clutching his arm with a desperation that pierced his heart. The fear in her eyes was raw, unfiltered, and Ethan felt it as if it were his own. Noah faced the spirit's wrath in an equally terrifying way. While trying to secure a broken window, an unseen force threw him against the wall, slamming him down hard enough to leave bruises. He cried out in pain and fear, and the sound seemed to mock him, echoing through the house. Objects around him rattled violently, and he felt invisible hands gripping his shoulders, pinning him in place. The sensation was so real, so oppressive, that he feared for his life. Ethan and Lily rushed to help, but even together, they could barely hold the terror at bay. Ethan himself began experiencing hallucinations, vivid and horrifying. He would see Victor's face appear in mirrors, in the shadows of doorways, always staring, always judging. Sleep became impossible. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined the spirit standing over him, whispering threats that chilled him to the bone. Guilt gnawed at him relentlessly. He had unknowingly reawakened Victor's anger by allowing guests into the house, and now he bore the full weight of responsibility for the torment his siblings endured. Amid the terror, Ethan realized the only way to survive was to confront the curse directly. They could no longer hide, ignore, or pretend the spirit was just a figment of imagination. Victor's presence was intelligent, deliberate, and growing stronger with each passing night. The siblings huddled together, holding on to each other for warmth and courage, whispering reassurances even as fear threatened to consume them. It was a fragile lifeline, but it was all they had in the face of a vengeance that refused to rest. After nights filled with relentless terror, Ethan and his siblings realized that there was no escaping the spirit. The estate, once a place of childhood memories, had become a prison where every shadow and sound carried Victor's wrath. The siblings gathered in the main hall, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear, trying to steady their racing hearts. Ethan's hands shook as he explained what Mr. Callahan had told them. The only way to end the torment was through a proper ritual, acknowledging the wrongs of the past and banishing Victor's spirit once and for all. Lily's voice trembled as she asked, "What if it doesn't work?" Ethan swallowed hard, the lump of guilt in his throat making it difficult to speak. "We have to try," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the thundering of his own heart. "There's no other choice." The weight of responsibility crushed him. Every glance at his siblings reminded him of why he had to be brave, even if he felt anything but. The fear was suffocating, But so was the guilt of allowing this situation to spiral out of control. Noah, trying to mask his trembling, helped gather the objects needed for the ritual: candles, protective symbols, holy water. Each item was carefully placed according to Mr. Callahan's instructions. The air in the estate was thick, almost electric, charged with anticipation and dread. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of shadow seemed amplified, as though Victor himself was aware of their preparations and readying to intervene. The siblings could feel the oppressive presence grow stronger, watching, judging, and testing their resolve. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to calm his panicked thoughts. He looked at Lily and Noah and saw the reflection of his own fear mirrored in their eyes. It was a terrifying bond, but it was also a source of strength. They were all in this together. As they lit the first candles and began the chants instructed by Mr. Callahan, the estate seemed to respond, the shadows shifting and twisting in unnatural ways. Cold drafts swept through the hall, carrying with them the faint whispers of Victor's anger, and Ethan felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. The siblings clung to each other, repeating the chants with trembling voices, their hearts pounding in unison. Fear threatened to paralyze them, but they pressed on, driven by the hope that this ritual could finally free them from Victor's wrath. Every shadow that stretched across the walls, every whisper that called their names, was a reminder that the spirit would not surrender easily. But they had no choice. They had to face the darkness, confront the vengeance, and reclaim their lives from the torment that had haunted them for far too long. As night fell, the siblings gathered in the center of the main hall, the flickering candlelight casting long, trembling shadows on the walls. Ethan's hands were clammy, his voice quivering as he began the chants Mr. Callahan had instructed them to follow. Lily and Noah mirrored him, their eyes wide with terror, clinging to each other for support. The air in the estate was thick, almost suffocating, charged with a tension that made it hard to breathe. Every creak, every gust of wind felt magnified, as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. Almost immediately, Victor's presence made itself known. A cold, icy draft swept through the room, extinguishing some of the candles and sending chills racing down the siblings' spines. The shadows on the walls began to twist unnaturally, stretching toward them with a menacing, almost sentient quality. A low, guttural whisper echoed from the corners of the room, repeating their names over and over, each syllable dripping with malice. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to continue chanting, his voice trembling yet resolute. Lily screamed as a chair flew across the hall, crashing against the wall mere inches from her. She stumbled, nearly falling to the floor, and Ethan rushed to steady her. Noah's eyes widened in terror as unseen hands seemed to grip his shoulders, pressing him down against the floor, the pressure almost unbearable. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, fear clawing at their throats, yet they continued the ritual, knowing that any hesitation could give Victor the upper hand. Ethan could feel the spirit targeting him more directly, punishing him for his role in reigniting the curse. Images of the past, Victor's death, the family arguments, the property dispute, flashed in his mind, each memory a sharp pang of guilt and fear. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, and the shadows pressed closer, as if intent on consuming them. Yet, amidst the terror, he clung to the voices of his siblings, their shared fear binding them together. It was their unity, their courage in the face of unimaginable horror, that allowed them to keep going when every instinct screamed at them to run. As the ritual progressed, Ethan noticed subtle changes. The shadows hesitated, and the whispers faltered slightly. For a brief moment, it felt as though Victor's presence was testing them, gauging whether they had the strength to see this through. Ethan's hands shook violently, sweat dripping down his face, but he refused to stop. Lily and Noah, equally terrified, held onto each other tightly, repeating the chants in trembling unison. The house seemed to tremble, reacting to their determination, and a faint hope flickered in Ethan's chest. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could end this nightmare tonight. The night had grown unbearably cold, and the estate seemed to pulse with Victor's wrath. As the siblings continued the ritual, the shadows thickened, swirling around them with an almost tangible malice. Ethan could feel the spirit pressing against him from all sides, trying to force them to break, to falter, to give in to fear. Every chant they uttered was met with resistance. A chilling wind, doors slamming, windows rattling, and the low, menacing laughter that echoed through the halls like a predator circling its prey. Lily clung to Ethan, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "We can do this. We have to." Her voice trembled, but in it lay determination that Ethan drew upon like a lifeline. Noah, though shaking violently, stood firm beside them, repeating the chants in a quivering voice, the candlelight reflecting in his wide, terrified eyes. The room seemed alive, responding to every word, every movement, as if Victor himself were aware of their every breath, every heartbeat. Suddenly, the candles flickered violently, and a gust of icy air threw the siblings to the floor. The shadows converged, forming a dark, towering figure that radiated pure fury. Ethan's chest heaved with panic as Victor's form loomed above them, whispering threats and accusations, dragging the memories of past arguments and betrayals into the room. The siblings screamed, but they clung together, each chant louder, more urgent, a defiance against the malevolent presence. Ethan's hands trembled as he reached the final words of the ritual. The air was thick, suffocating, and the shadows writhed violently, trying to resist the binding. He could feel Victor's rage pressing down on him, whispering guilt and fear into every fiber of his being. But in that moment, he focused entirely on his siblings, on the fragile thread of courage that connected them. He poured every ounce of determination and love into the final chant, his voice cracking but refusing to break. As the words left his lips, a blinding light erupted from the candles, and the shadows screamed, a guttural, bone-chilling sound that seemed to shake the walls of the estate itself. Ethan shielded his eyes, feeling the oppressive presence weaken, as if Victor was being forced back, dragged from this world by the strength of the ritual and the unity of his family. When the light dimmed and the room fell silent, the siblings lay on the floor, gasping, drenched in sweat, hearts pounding. The estate was still, the air finally free of the heavy, malevolent weight that had haunted them for weeks. The first light of dawn barely pierced the windows of the estate, but it brought with it a sense of calm that the siblings had not felt in weeks. Ethan, Lily, and Noah sat huddled together in the main hall, their bodies trembling, their hearts still racing from the intensity of the previous night. The oppressive weight that had filled the house for so long seemed to have lifted, leaving behind an almost tangible relief. Yet the exhaustion and fear lingered. They were safe for now, but the memory of Victor's wrath remained etched in their minds, a chilling reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. Ethan looked around the room, taking in the battered candles, the scattered symbols, and the overturned furniture. Every detail told the story of the terror they had endured, yet also of the courage they had summoned to confront it. His chest felt heavy with a mixture of guilt and gratitude. Guilt for unknowingly reigniting the curse by allowing guests into the estate, and gratitude that his siblings had survived and that they had found the strength to see the ritual through. The ordeal had changed him in ways he couldn't yet fully comprehend, leaving scars that were invisible but no less real. Lily, still clutching Ethan's arm, spoke softly, her voice trembling but determined. "We did it. We really did it." Tears ran down her cheeks, a mix of relief and lingering fear. Ethan nodded, feeling a lump form in his throat. He wanted to believe that this was the end, that Victor's spirit would never return. But a part of him remained wary. They had confronted centuries-old anger and survived, but the knowledge that unresolved family conflicts could have such terrifying consequences weighed heavily on all of them. Noah, who had been quiet for most of the night, finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "I can't believe we made it through. I thought it would never end." His words hung in the air, heavy with disbelief and lingering terror. Ethan reached out, placing a hand on Noah's shoulder, feeling the tremor beneath the skin. The siblings shared a moment of fragile unity, understanding that their bond, their ability to support and protect each other, had been the key to surviving Victor's vengeance. As they slowly began to clean and restore the estate, Ethan reflected on the lessons learned. The curse had been born from anger, greed, and unresolved family disputes, and it had thrived on fear and mistakes. By acknowledging the past, performing the ritual, and standing together, they had broken its hold. But Ethan knew that vigilance was necessary. They could not afford to forget the dangers of ignoring old wrongs. The house, now quiet and seemingly peaceful, was a testament to both the darkness that had once consumed it and the resilience of those who had faced it head-on. The days that followed were filled with a quiet vigilance. Ethan, Lily, and Noah worked together to reinforce the protective measures that Mr. Callahan had recommended. Every doorway was sprinkled with salt, every window lined with protective symbols, and sacred objects were carefully placed throughout the estate. The once oppressive halls now felt lighter, though shadows still danced in the corners, harmlessly, as if acknowledging the new balance. Ethan moved through the house cautiously, his hands still trembling at times, but determined to restore a sense of normalcy for his siblings. Lily took it upon herself to clean and organize the estate, her movements methodical, almost ritualistic. Each action felt like a reassurance that they had reclaimed their home. The fear that had once dominated her nights had faded into a cautious awareness, a reminder that vigilance and respect for the past were essential. She often paused in the hallways, glancing at the shadows, half expecting a flicker of Victor's presence. But each time, she found only emptiness. The relief was palpable, though tinged with the memory of what they had endured. Noah, still recovering from the physical and emotional toll of the haunting, helped Ethan inspect every room, ensuring that no area had been overlooked. He would run his hands along the walls, whispering protective words he had learned from Mr. Callahan, as though the act itself could ward off any lingering malice. The siblings spoke little of the horrors they had faced, but the silence between them carried a shared understanding, a bond forged in terror, strengthened by courage, and solidified by survival. Ethan reflected on the lessons that the ordeal had taught them. The family curse had been born of unresolved conflict and nurtured by negligence. It had shown them that mistakes, even those made with good intentions, could carry unforeseen consequences. By acknowledging the past, taking responsibility, and standing together, They had faced a centuries-old vengeance and survived. But more importantly, they had learned the value of family, unity, and respect for the forces, both seen and unseen, that shaped their lives. As night fell over the estate, Ethan, Lily, and Noah sat together in the main hall, the glow of the candles casting a warm, steady light. For the first time in weeks, they felt a sense of peace. The estate was no longer a prison of fear, but a home reclaimed. The shadows still whispered faintly, but now they were just reminders of what had been overcome. The curse of Uncle Victor had been broken, and though the scars of fear and guilt would remain, the family had emerged stronger, bound together by courage and love that no spirit could ever undo. Even with the curse broken, the siblings found that the echoes of terror lingered. Every creak of the floor or distant whisper of wind reminded them of the nights filled with Victor's wrath. Ethan, in particular, struggled with guilt, replaying the moments when his careless decision had allowed the spirit to grow stronger. He often sat alone in the quiet of the estate, hands clasped tightly, trying to steady his racing thoughts. The fear was no longer immediate, but it had transformed into a subtle, lingering awareness, an understanding that the consequences of the past could reach far beyond the living. Lily, despite her relief, sometimes woke in the middle of the night, her heart hammering and her body drenched in sweat. Shadows in her room seemed larger, more menacing, and for a moment, she felt Victor's presence brush against her, a lingering trace of the malevolence they had faced. Each time, Ethan or Noah would calm her, holding her close and whispering reminders that they were safe. Slowly, over weeks, these moments became less frequent, the fear gradually losing its power, replaced by the confidence that they had faced darkness and prevailed. Noah, though quieter than his siblings, carried his own memories of the terror. He would sometimes glance at the estate's empty corners and feel the weight of past assaults, the memory of objects thrown and invisible hands gripping him pressed against his chest. But he, too, found solace in their shared bond. In their togetherness, he realized, lay the strength to keep moving forward, to leave the estate's horrors behind without being consumed by them. Ethan gathered his siblings in the main hall one evening, the warm glow of candlelight casting long shadows across the room. "We've survived Victor's wrath," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "And we've done it together. The past can't touch us anymore. If we remember the lessons it taught us and stay united, nothing can break us again." Lily and Noah nodded, tears welling in their eyes, not just from relief but from gratitude, for survival, for each other, and for the courage they had found in the darkest of nights. Though the estate remained quiet and peaceful, the siblings had changed. They were no longer merely residents of a house. They were guardians of their family's history, aware of the shadows that lingered and ready to face them with bravery and love. The curse had been a test, and they had passed, not only by banishing Victor, but by confronting the fear, guilt, and pain that had bound them. They had survived, and in doing so, discovered a resilience stronger than any spirit's vengeance. The estate, once a place of fear and torment, finally began to feel like home again. The shadows that had seemed so threatening now moved quietly, harmlessly, as if acknowledging that the spirit's anger had been quelled. Ethan, Lily, and Noah spent their days repairing, cleaning, and restoring their home, their movements deliberate and careful, each action a reminder that they were reclaiming their lives from the darkness that had threatened to consume them. Every corner they cleared, every object they placed with intention, was a small victory over the lingering echoes of Victor's wrath. Ethan often paused in quiet reflection, thinking about the lessons the curse had taught them. Material disputes, unresolved family conflicts, and careless decisions had created the conditions for a centuries-old vengeance. Yet, by confronting these issues, acknowledging their mistakes, and standing together, they had survived. He felt a profound sense of responsibility, not only for maintaining the estate, but also for preserving the lessons learned, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. It was a heavy weight, but also a comforting one, for it gave meaning to their suffering and survival. Lily, now able to sleep without fear, often sat by the window at night, watching the moonlight dance across the estate grounds. The quiet calm that surrounded them felt almost surreal after weeks of relentless terror. Occasionally, she would remember the chilling whispers, the icy grips, and the shadows that had stalked them, and a shiver would run down her spine. But these memories no longer held power over her. They were reminders of strength and resilience, of the courage she and her siblings had found in the darkest hours. Noah, too, felt a renewed sense of purpose. The physical and emotional scars remained, subtle but enduring. Yet he recognized that these marks were not just of pain. They were symbols of survival. The family had faced a spirit fueled by anger and vengeance, and emerged not only intact but stronger. They had discovered that unity, courage, and love could overcome even the darkest forces. In the evenings, the siblings would gather in the main hall, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet companionship. The estate, once a site of terror, had become a sanctuary, a testament to their resilience and their bond. The curse of Uncle Victor, born from greed and anger, had been broken, leaving only lessons and the strength to move forward. And though the shadows would occasionally linger at the edges of their vision, they no longer carried the same fear. They carried a reminder of victory, of survival, and of the enduring power of family. For Ethan, Lily, and Noah, the estate had become more than a home. It had become a symbol of hope, courage, and the unbreakable bonds that could withstand even the most vengeful of spirits. The nights grew quieter, the air lighter, and the memories of fear faded into the past, leaving a lasting peace that they had fought so hard to reclaim.